Alright, hello hackers, welcome to the second part of this app build where we've already built our user interface in video number 1, and now we're going to be having a look at the coding side of things so that we can get everything ready to go. So to begin with, what we need to do is obviously come into PyCharm, open it up, and then set up a new project. So remember, we want to set up a new project based on the folder where our UI file was stored, and then we also want to open up our interpreter, make sure that we've got an existing interpreter selected down there, and then we have an interpreter in that box. Okay, so once we've clicked that, it gives us the normal warning saying the folder's not empty. Do we want to do something? No, just tick yes there. And then do you want it in this window or another one? I'm just going to say this window for now. Okay, so the only file I have here is my XML code, which is my UI file. So I need to convert that first thing. So I'm going to come into terminal here. So just by selecting it down the bottom and type in the normal command that I would, so PyQt5, and then I need the file name that I'm going to be converting, so main window.ui, and then -o for output, and then I'm going to call it UI_main window.py. Now remember, I use these names all of the time so that it means that my boilerplate code is super simple and easy to use. And then if I press enter and I get no error message, that means it worked. So I just need to toggle this folder up and down so that I can then get my code for my UI sitting there ready to go. So now I have my UI file. What I need to do now is I need to build 2 more files, okay? And the reason we build 2 files is so that we can modularize our program. So we have our UI file sitting there on one side. We are going to come in and select a new Python file, which is going to be called main window. Okay, and this is like our controller file that sits in the middle. And then finally on the other side of that, we then need like a data store. Now, sometimes in like real apps, this would be a full database, but in this case, it's just gonna be a little file. Now, we're not storing any data as such here, but just so that we're in the best habit of keeping each of these things separate, we're going to have our UI file, we're going to have our main file that talks to the UI file and talks to the data store, and then inside the data store file, that is where we are going to complete all of our calculations. Okay, so the 2 calculations that we need to do. So the next thing that I need to do is I'm going to just quickly open up my boilerplate file. Alrighty, here we are here. So this is our boilerplate code, and the reason I call it, or not I call it, the reason it's called that is because basically it sits there and it doesn't need to change, and it's the same for every application that you build. So you can see that even here I've already got my UI from our main window file being imported. I'm already getting a data store class from a data store file, which we haven't built yet, but that's getting imported, and I am setting up variables so that I can quickly reference those 2 classes so that everything's sitting there ready to go. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to copy and paste this. Now, if you haven't built yourself one of these files, that's okay, but I am going to leave that on screen for you. So if you quickly go back and pause it, so that's it sitting there. You will be able to quickly copy down that code so it's sitting there ready to go in your window. Alrighty, so from here, now that we have started to set up our constructor, we do need to start to have a look at a couple of different things in our constructor file so that we can get our page working the way that we want, or our app working the way that we want. First things first, we want to tell it which page on the stacked widget it needs to be looking at. So we're going to say self.ui.stackedWidget. Okay, remember that name is automatically set by Qt, and because we didn't change it, it makes it easy to remember what it was. Then I'm going to say set current widget, and I want it to be UI home. Okay, so it's that home function that's sitting on the stacked widget class over there. Okay, so that's it. That's our first thing. So now when we load up our page, if we were to press run, so let's quickly check that out. So right click on main window, come down to run. Okay, and it doesn't have a data store class. Okay, so let me quickly comment that one out so I can just demonstrate what we're looking at here. So run, and obviously that needs to be commented out because we haven't done that either. Sorry about that. There we go. So our app runs and it brings up our home page. Now, again, these buttons don't work because they're not ready to yet. So we're going to come back here and get rid of those so that these don't error out anymore. What we might do is jump into our data store page and then just very quickly build out that class so that it's ready to go. So first things first, I want to put a comment up here so that you remember there is no data here. Right, so just a quick comment there to remind you why it is that we are still building with a data store, even though we're not storing any data. So from there, we need to create our class. So we're just going to have class data store. And then we want to define its init function. Now, because we're not actually going to do anything, we might just put a pass in there so that it actually works for now. All right, inside of this file, we only need to do 2 calculations. Normally in our init function, we might run things that set up our data store, but because we're not storing any data, we can sort of cheat the system here and just put these other functions inside the class so that we can access them quickly and easily. So jumping back to our main window here, what we're going to be looking to do is just to start building out any of the other functionality that we need. So remember, we have quite a few buttons that are throughout our application. So that means we need to connect their signal, or sorry, we need to tell it what its signal is and then connect the slot that it's going to go to. So from here, let's get that done. So self.ui.bmr, and then it was just called BMR button, okay? And then we're gonna have that the signal is clicked, and then that the slot is gonna be connect, and then we're gonna call it self.showBMR, okay? So a really quick and easy function. Now remember, we're not calling the function here, we're just saying where it is in memory for the computer to be able to compile it in that way. Then we need one for our BMI button, so self.ui BMI_button, and again it's the same, it's going to be the signal of clicked, and we're going to connect that to self.showBMI. Okay, so slightly different name there, but obviously a very different function. Then we also have 2 buttons, one on either page. Okay, so we're going to have self.ui.bmr calculate button. Okay, now I have made a typo in my UI. Okay, I didn't put the E on the end there, but with the type in, I can just press enter and then that's going to find that. Normally you would go back in and maybe change the UI, but to do that I need to open Designer and then re-export that. So actually, well, let's do that really quickly and I'll show you how that process works. So all I need to do is come into Designer. Okay, so if I come into Designer and I find the thing that was wrong, so where were we? That was BMR. So we're going to come into here, find that button. So you can see we've got the E on the BMI one, but on the BMR one, oh, there we are. Click on calculate. I'm going to change that name. Okay, so put the E on the end so that it actually is correct. And then all I need to do is just save this file. I can then jump back into PyCharm. Okay, and then I'm just going to run that same terminal code again. So just press up, enter. That updates this file, which now means that when we come in here, self.ui dot and then BMR_calculate, you can see that we now have the E on the end there. So that's how quick and easy it is to update your UI if you want to make changes. Now for this one, we're going to have, again, that the signal is clicked and that it is going to connect to self.calc_BMR. Okay, sorry, I had to think of what we were doing. And then same for the BMI one. BMI calculate button clicked. Connect to self.calc_BMI. All right, now it is obviously identifying that these things don't exist at the moment, and that's because we haven't created them. So nothing to worry about there at this point in time, because now we're going to jump down and start to code each of these particular functions. So the quickest ones for us to do first up would be to do our show one. So we're going to go define show BMR. Okay, and that function, all it's going to do is set the current widget of our stacked widget to be the BMR page. So self.ui stacked widget set current widget, and it needs to go to BMR. Okay, now I'm going to cheat. I'm going to just copy and paste that function and change this one to say BMI and change this one to say BMI. Alright, so those things now are both going to sit where we need them to. So if I press the play button here so that we can test out our... Oh, of course, we can't test it yet because the other two functions don't exist. So I'm just going to go calc BMR and just put a pass in so that it will run. And then that way we can have a quick look at what our program's going to look like so far and test that everything's working. So ideally, the only functionality we've tested so far or coded so far is that we click that button, it changes to body mass index. We click that button, it changes to basal metabolic rate. So now we know that our two buttons are working, we can start to have a think about these particular functions and then coding those in the way that we need. So let's do the BMI one first because it's actually the simpler of the two calculations. So if we were to think about what we need this app to do, first of all, we need to get the input values from the UI. Okay, that's first things first. Okay, and then from there, we are going to need to pass those to our data store so that we can actually calculate with them. And then we need to format our output so that it's ready to go and then output to the UI. All right, so 4 different things that we need to do in this particular function. All right, so first off, we need to get that input from there. Now, when we say that we need to get the input, what we're saying is we're going to go to this file, all right, except while it's running, and grab the value that's in those 2 text boxes. Now we're going to do this the quickest and easiest way that I can think of. So to start with, what we're going to do is start with a height. Okay, so height equals creating this variable, and then we're going to just drag an integer out of self.ui.bmi underscore weight, where are we? Weight input, okay, dot text, and then we're going to call that there. Okay, and then we need, oh, not weight, this one's height. Okay, and then we can copy and paste this one underneath, and we're going to change that one to weight and that one to weight, and we get the same thing. Right, now obviously this isn't ideal because we're just saying you are going to be an integer, but it's the quickest and easiest way for us to get through this because the purpose of this app coding shoot is more about how to get the functionality to work with our UI. All right, and the next thing we need to do is to pass those values to our data store. Okay, so this means we need to go and run a function in the data store itself, but we're going to need to be able to get that value back. So I'm going to call this one result. Okay, so create another variable, and then I'm going to say self.ds, okay, .bmi underscore calc. Now again, this thing doesn't exist yet, but I'm going to pass through 2 variables, my height and my weight. Okay, so that's getting the input from the UI, passing it through as arguments to this BMI calculator function. Now, before we go about how we're going to format the output and things like that, let's jump into our data store and actually code the calculation side of things so that we have that ready to go. All right, so calculate here, data store. Then we're going to say define BMI underscore calc. Okay, so that's the function that we called before. Okay, now we need to be able to tell it where these arguments are coming from. So first up, you are going to get height, and then you are going to get weight. All right, now I like to name these so that it makes it nice and easy for us to remember which is which. Obviously, we don't want to call them number 1 and number 2 because then it makes it harder to remember. So give those variables in terms of the arguments that you're going to be bringing in a name that describes what it is that it's going to get. Then I'm just going to say that my BMI is going to equal a round number, okay, which is going to be weight divided by, and the reason we've got those extra brackets is because the calculation itself is height divided by 100. Okay, and this is probably one thing that we're missing in our UI. And then height divided by 100. Okay, because it needs to be height in centimeters. Now we need to check to make sure that we've got the right number of brackets. We need a 1 in there. Okay, so our BMI is going to equal our weight in kilograms divided by our weight in meters squared. Hence divide by 100 because we are getting someone to type in their height in centimeters. All right, now from here, this makes things nice and easy for us because now we can just say that we want to return BMI, okay, which is going to clear that variable not appearing. And when we jump back into here, when we send back BMI, it is going to be called result. So that's going to mean that we can now format our output on our label ready to go. So in terms of the label, what we're going to do is we're going to create one more variable because we're going to need to be able to send that to the UI. So we're going to say output equals, and then I'm just going to put my quotes in and type in what I want. So you entered the following information for BMI, height, weight. I'll put an and in there actually. And space, weight. This means your BMI is one more of those. And I'm just going to quickly come back here and make this a little bit more obvious for the reader. So I'm going to say height in centimeters, weight in kg. All right. Now these curly braces that you can see here allow us to format our code. So now we can say .format, and then from there we're going to have height, weight, result. All right, so we've got all of that typed in, we've got it formatted. Now we just need to output it to the UI. So the UI is nice and easy. We're just going to say self.ui dot, and then we need to target that label. So we're going BMI underscore output label. Whoops, wrong one. Output label dot set text, and then we want to put in our output variable. Okay, so that's going to clear that one. So now our calculation is ready to go. So again, if we go through to try and test our window, we can now press play. It's going to open up. We can come into our BMI. We can type in a height and we can type in a weight. We can hit the calculate button, and then it's going to drop those values down there for us. So we can see you entered the following information: height 172 centimeters. Let's grab it from up there. Weight 65 kilos, which means your BMI is 22. All right, now if we try and do any of that over here, obviously that hasn't been coded yet, so we can't do that. All right, so that gets things working really, really quickly and easily for our BMI. Now we need to go and do the same for our BMR. So this is our other calculation that we have here. Now, interestingly enough, we need to do the same thing. So we're going to need to get input values from the UI. We also need to pass values to data store. We then need to format our output, and we need to output to UI. All right, so the same 4 steps, except obviously things are a little bit more complex this time around. So the first thing we need to do is we need to find out what the gender is, okay? Because remember we had sort of 2 tick boxes there. So we're just going to write a simple if statement. So we're going to say if self.ui.bmr underscore male radio dot is checked. Okay, so that's going to check to see if this one has the tick box in it. If that's true, we're going to set gender to male. Okay, else we're going to just set it to female. Gender equals female. Okay, now this is why I sort of cheated the system earlier in our user interface and checked that box when we started, because that way we don't need to sort of error check and have any pop-up messages, which I'll show you how to do in another tutorial at another time. But just to get the calculations working here a little bit quicker, we're going to do that first. So now we have our gender set. Then working down the page, we had height. Okay, so height and weight are actually the same as down here. So we're going to grab those, drop them in here, except the main thing we need to remember to change is that it needs to be BMR. Okay, and that's why I kept that same naming convention of BMI underscore height input, BMI underscore weight input, because then the BMR ones, which I named the same, I could then quickly come and change here, which made it super fast. All right, now I'm going to grab one more of these because we also need the age. Okay, so I'm going to change this to the age variable. And again, remember, we had BMR underscore age input. So that's our third one sitting there ready to go. Now you could sit there and type that if you wanted to, but I'm going to copy and paste to keep it nice and quick and really, really easy. And then the last thing that we need to calculate here, or sorry, last bit of input that we need to get is our activity level. Now this is basically the same as up here with our if statement, but obviously we've got lots more. So we're going to say if self.ui. What's the first one? BMR underscore sedentary. Okay, dot is checked. Nope, wrong one. Is checked. Okay, we want to say that our activity equals sedentary. Okay, elif, so the next if statement, self.ui.bmr underscore lightly dot is checked. Okay, that one's going to mean that the activity is set to lightly. And then elif, we just keep going. Self.ui.bmr underscore, what was next? Moderately dot is checked. Then we're going to have activity equal moderately. You should get the idea here. I'm not going to talk through the rest of them. Right, and then again, because I sort of cheated the system earlier and had one of the boxes checked right from the start, if the user forgets to tick a box, it will default to sedentary, okay, but then our else is just going to need to be extremely because it's the only other thing that it can be. So now that we have all of our values, we have our gender, we have our height, we have our weight, our age, and our activity, we can then look to build our function where we pass these through to our data store. So again, the same, we're going to basically do the same format we had before. So we're going to have results, because if it's not broke, don't fix it. Self.ds.bmr underscore calc. Okay, and then we need to pass through all of the variables in the right order. So let's start with gender. Then we're going to have height, weight, age, and activity. Okay, so that gets all of those things passed through as arguments, which means that then in our data store, we can come and build this function here, our BMR calc one. So come down a little bit further, define BMR underscore calc. Okay, so self, then we had gender, height, weight, age, activity. Okay, so that's each of those. And then we need to actually build our calculation itself. Okay, so again, this is where things are going to get a little bit trickier. So what I might just quickly do is I'm going to open up Google Chrome and I'm going to show you what the calculation looks like. BMR calc. Right, so you can see here that when we're in metric, can I open the right page that I want? No, I don't want an actual calculator. Let's have a look at the formulas. Okay, you can see that we have these like random numbers that modify stuff. Okay, and it's different based on your gender. Okay, so let's have a look at this page here, quickly see if that opens up what we're looking for. Height in pounds and inches. No, we want this in metric. That one will do. So you can see that for women and for men, I'm saying it's the same. That's not correct. There we go. So for men, we start with 66.5, whereas for women, we start with 655.1. Okay, so because these two calculations are different, what we need to do is set up some extra variables here so that we don't have any what we call magic numbers within our calculation. So to start with, let's work through the male side of things. So we're going to say if gender equals male. Okay, so this is going to check the gender first thing. We are going to say that our start value equals 66. Okay, these are all the values that I got from those things before. So we'll do weight next. Weight underscore modifier equals 13.7. Height underscore modifier equals 5, and then age underscore modifier equals 6.8. Okay, so that's where we're going to start so far. So these are our little magic numbers that we would normally put in, which makes our calculation easier to do at the bottom. All right, then what we need to do is work out what our different activity levels are. Okay, so starting with, well, actually, no, they're going to remain the same. So we can sort of cheat the system here, which means then we can jump back here and say else. We need to put the female values in. So we can say start underscore value equals 655. I'm going to leave off the 0.1. Weight underscore value. Oops, no, weight underscore modifier. Keep the names the same, otherwise it's not going to make sense, Mr. Hyde. 9.6. Height underscore modifier needs to be spelt correctly. Yep. Equals. That one's 1.8. I'm going to come back and put that 0.1 on. Okay, and then I'm going to go age underscore modifier equals, and then that one's 4.7. So these values are different whether you're male or female, and then that's going to impact the calculation a little bit later on. All right, so from here, then we need to have a look at our activity, okay? Because the activity level then changes the amount of calories you need to intake each day as well. So we're going to say if activity equals sedentary, activity LF So remember, our else here is our extremely active one, because again, it's the last one. So activity modifier equals 1.9. Okay, so all of these hopefully are spelled the same the whole way through. We will find out in a minute, because they otherwise will stay gray if they're not used. Okay, we still haven't used these values here. That's okay, we're about to now. So from there, we're going to have BMR equals, it's an integer, okay? And then we're going to have a whole heap of different calculations. So the first one is start underscore value, okay? Plus, all right, and then I'm going to come down a line, try and keep this nice and easy to read. Weight underscore modifier multiplied by weight. And then we need a plus at the end there. And then we need height underscore modifier multiplied by height plus. Then we are opening up another set of brackets for age. Age underscore modifier multiplied by age. Plus, oh no, not plus, then we're just going to multiply by our activity modifier. Now I can see already from here that one of them was spelt wrong, but to make it easy, I'm going to select that one. Okay, and then when I click off, I can see already down here that that's the one that isn't white now, so that's the one with the error in it. That makes things much easier. Okay, now I've got my red squiggly line here because I'm missing a bracket up there at the start. So I'm going to close that bracket down there, and then that means I've now got my BMR sitting there ready to go, which means I can say return BMR, and that means it's going to then send it back to our function as the result. So then finally we can sit down and we can enter in our output. So again, we're going to say output equals, and then I'm going to say the BMR for a year-old who is centimeters tall and now because of these, it's going to make it tricky for me to put this in with a activity level is, and then that's in calories. Okay, and then we can quickly format that one. Okay, so the first thing that we're getting is their age, then we are using their gender, then we're using the height, then the weight, then the activity level, and then finally the result. All right, so that gets us that there. It's really long, that's not very good. But then we can jump into our output and we can say, very similar to last time, okay, except obviously this time we're going to be talking to a different output label. So we're going to have our self.ui.bmr_output label, okay, and we're going to set our text to output. All right, so hopefully that's it ready to go. I know that was a bit of a long slog, but let's press play on that one. It's going to format a little bit crap here because of the activity, but that's okay. So BMI should still work, 172.65. That should get us 22. Good. Our BMR, we're going to already have male ticked, 172.65, 31. And if I tick the moderately active one, moderately activity level. Okay, so obviously that's not ideal. We could go back and change what it sends through as those values so that way it'll match up a little bit better. But let's leave it as it is for now because it's working and that's all good. We can see that if we do tick a different box here and click the calculate button, we get a different number. Okay, so we jump up a few calories each time as we move up or down the scale, which is good. So hopefully that shows you very quickly how you can make a health calculation app in under an hour. Okay, starting from fresh with no graphical user interface and working all the way through to the end of the code with the application running. So good luck. I hope that your creation has gone as smoothly as that, and I look forward to seeing you in another tutorial soon.